Hello and welcome everybody. I'm Dr. Gabrielle Orsi, Project Manager with the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our webinar today. Just a few words before we get into our presentation about housekeeping matters. Most importantly, we'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. The Northwest MHTTC honors the many cultures and lands across our region, which spans Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and the state of Washington. And it's important to us to acknowledge that our center, which is based in Seattle, is housed on the traditional lands of the Duwamish and Coast Salish peoples, past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded and continue to steward this land over many generations. The MHTTC network consists of a number of regional centers, as well as a National Hispanic and Latino Center and a National American Indian and Alaska Native Center. We serve the Pacific Northwest region, so we're in the top left corner of the map. We encourage you to find your local center if you're not in one of the 4 states that we serve. Specifically more about our center, we, as I said, focus on HHS Region 10, Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. We offer a variety of free trainings for the mental health workforce and behavioral health workforce to help them enhance their skills and knowledge and learn how to implement evidence-based practices, which is one of our particular focuses. We have a bunch of resources as well as free online e-courses, and I encourage you to check out our website to learn about all the various things that we are doing. A word about language today. First off, it's not on the slide, but you are being recorded and other people can see what's in the chat. So just be mindful of what you might want to communicate today. We use affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language that demonstrates respect for a person. It focuses on the person rather than the condition and provides a hopeful and positive environment. You can see some more about this kind of person-first recovery-oriented language here on a slide. Okay, a little bit about the Zoom platform that we are working with today. Audience members are going to be muted with their video off. We are recording. We'll be circulating the slides later on to everybody who registered. And we'll also be sending out an email with a link where those folks who attended the live webinar can download a certificate of attendance. We are not offering CEUs for today's session. The chat is a great way to communicate both to the room at large, as well as to ask for technical support or questions that aren't specifically on topic. Everybody can see what you type in the chat by default, unless you target one of our panelists. We've got some staff from the NWMHCTC today, as well as our presenter. So chat is your option for kind of asking for help. If you have a topical question about the subject matter of today's presentation, please use the Q&A feature instead of the chat. If you can't figure out the Q&A feature, that's okay. Ask it in the chat. We'd rather have you ask than not ask. The Q&A feature does allow us to compile questions in one place for easy access when we get to the Q&A period of today's presentation, though. So we do encourage you to use that Q&A feature to ask your subject matter questions. There'll be a short evaluation at the end of this presentation. We really hope and encourage you to fill it out. It's critical for our work. It's not only helpful for us to improve our trainings, it's required by our grantor, SAMHSA. So it really makes a difference in a lot of ways if you fill out that evaluation. And we thank you in advance for doing so and taking that brief few minutes to fill it out. Quick disclaimer, I promise I won't read this whole thing to you, but SAMHSA sponsors our work here at the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, but this presentation does not reflect an official position by SAMHSA. This disclaimer is also available on our website if you need to consult it in the future. Finally, just a quick shout out that the Oregon Family Support Network is going to be offering a training that very well complements this one with us next week, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Pacific time. It's a family partner orientation. You can find it on our website. And yeah, so if you have any questions about that, please type in the chat. We'll be happy to post a link there to this event. Finally, it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Shauna. She's a family support specialist and a trainer for Oregon Family Support Network. She's got deep experience in a number of domains. I won't read you her bio, but I can just assure you she's a delightful, warm, and friendly presenter. I am so grateful that she's returning with us today. And without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Shauna.
Thank you so very, very much. Let me get our slides up here and we're going to get rocking and rolling. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a very big class. I'm super, super excited. Looks like we've got about 160 people today. So this is going to be, we're going to have a good time. It's going to be fun. Why is that not at the beginning? There we go. So welcome everybody. Today's topic for our for our webinar is going to be family-led crisis planning and how to make that crisis planning work for you. And that how to work for you if you're a provider in the room, how to work for you if you're a family member in the room, raising children or young people or young adults who have mental health, behavioral health, or addiction challenges, and how we can learn to partner together in this process. So I would like to let you know a little bit about what we're going to do for the next hour and a half, 2 hours or so. We really have some specific objectives for this content today. First, by the time we end our session together, the goal is to understand how crisis plans are created and how they should be used by a family, right? We're going to understand why families must lead this crisis planning process, right? We're going to talk a lot about that systemic shift, that mind shift, the work shift from system-led crisis plans to family-led crisis plans. We're going to discuss and reach the goals of increasing the family voice and choice in crisis planning, and really dive into how all family life domains, all 12 life domains, should be involved and considered and utilized when we are doing family-led crisis planning. And at the very end, we're just going to talk about some practical strategies, some best practice strategies to help guide the process moving forward when we are utilizing family-led crisis plans. So the structure for today for this session, we're really going to start off with just setting the foundation. We're going to put the concrete down, and then we're going to build the house on top of that concrete, right? And so the first thing we're going to do is start the foundation around what is crisis, what leads to it, signs and symptoms, what is this family-led thing, what's this family-driven thing. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between crisis stabilization, crisis planning. We're going to get a little nerdy just really quickly with a little neurobiology. And then we're going to really explore this life domains component and work our way to some best practices. And then we'll end our session today with some barriers that might unintentionally get in the way of doing comprehensive-led, family-driven crisis planning. And then we'll just do some recap review, have a little talk about culture, and then we're going to end with some additional ongoing strategies and supports for building more skills, knowledge, and abilities as providers or as families in the room. So let me say hi, hello to everybody. I am Shauna Kanega, as they said. And, I just want to introduce myself, tell you a little bit about who you're going to hang out with for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. First and foremost, I am in front of you today in this webinar because I am the mother to an amazing, creative, wonderful, smart, strong, resilient young adult. My daughter is 28 now. So I'm the mom to a daughter who lives with mental health and behavioral health challenges. And that's a primary reason why I'm here today. I have had a journey with her since she was about 12 or 13 in this mental health capacity around safety and stability and crisis planning, which has ignited a passion for a career in supporting other families and providers as well, who might be walking the same journey and encountering some of the same strategies and processes and systems and policies and different things that might encompass safety, stability, wellness, and well-being for the young people in our lives and our communities. I'm also the proud grandma of two young boys now, sassy, energetic, wonderful, wonderful little men. I am the statewide peer-delivered services trainer for Oregon Family Support Network. And for those of you who might be new to Oregon Family Support Network, we are your Oregon chapter of the National Federation of Families. So what does that mean in a nutshell? We get the honor and the privilege of doing educational sessions, advocacy, empowerment, as well as providing family support specialists for parents, caregivers, and forever people who are raising children with mental health, behavioral health, and addiction challenges, as well as complex needs. I'm an Oregon native, born and bred here in Oregon. I have never lived anywhere else. Get to travel a little bit here and there to do trainings or to do conferences. I've had the honor to teach in Texas and Florida, Washington, D.C., as well as do wonderful webinars like this one. And I'm also a family support specialist in the state of Oregon. I've got about 15 years now working with youth and families, particularly with disconnected and disenfranchised youth and families, and those who are navigating the mental health and behavioral health and addiction system services and support world. So that's a little bit about me and why I am here. Let's take a moment to learn a little bit about you. Like, who's all in the room today? It looks like we're now up to 170 people. So we're going to do a very quick poll to just see, hey, who's in the room? What hat are you wearing today primarily? And you can pick multiple hats. Are you here as the parent or somebody with lived experience raising a child with complex needs? Are you from the educational system, the juvenile justice? Are you a mental health provider? Are you with the spiritual community in some capacity? And let's just see who's here, who's hanging out with us today and gaining some extra skills, knowledge, and abilities. We'll give that a little bit of time to let y'all pick those hats. Oh, I can already see a trend. We have quite a few of y'all from the mental health, behavioral health system community. That's awesome. We got lots of youth and family providers in the room. That is so great. We got some peer support in the room. Hey, when we've got family members here, caregivers, parents, community members, some from the spiritual community. All right. I'll give you guys a couple more. We got about 80% of the people in the room have voted on what hat you're wearing today in the room. A few more. All right. Great. Well, you know what? Let's take a look here. So it looks like we have about 50% in here are from the mental health and the behavioral health systems. That's fabulous. Thank you so much for being here. We've got youth and family support, some peer support providers, some people from the educational system, and a few families here too. So welcome to you all. We're beyond excited that you're here for this topic today, this exceptionally important topic that we're going to discuss. So really great that you are joining us today. So I'm going to stop sharing. Let's see if y'all can see that. All right. And I'm going to close that out. Thank you so much for doing that. So we are going to jump into some content. So since we have limited time today, and this, I'll give you a little bit of transparency. This class is normally 3-4 hours that we do in person. But now that we are in pre-COVID, everything's on Zoom, shorten it down a little bit. So this is a lot of content in a short amount of time. So we're probably going to move pretty swiftly. Please go ahead and use the Q&A feature, the chat feature, and we'll try to get to some of those questions or maybe additions or stories throughout this session at the end. One of the things I really want to set the stage with as we dive into family-led and family-driven crisis planning is really this idea of crisis in general, right? One of the things that is really vitally important is, what is this crisis thing and what it leads to these crises, and how can we use that lens moving forward to have positive health and wellness outcomes for our families and our youth, and to be able to have success in our communities as people define success, and really being able to dive into those foundational components before we start looking at some of the best practice around what is and is not crisis for families. So we're going to start off with a little bit of definitions. The first thing I want us to talk about today is, what is a crisis? What is a crisis? And you can find multiple definitions. You can get in a dictionary, get on the Wikipedia, and really look at some of these linguistic ways of defining crisis, of being an intense time of difficulty or danger, trouble in somebody's life. It could be a turning point where an important decision has to be made. It could be an emotionally stressful time or a traumatic change for a person or a family or a community, right? And at the end of the day, when it comes to what are these troubles or dangers or stressors or difficulties, they are just going to be a variety of different things. For some people, a crisis could really be around a job loss, right? It could be around an illness or an injury, finding yourself now in houselessness. That was such an increase during our COVID time, right? And this journey we've been on with the pandemic. It could be for some a divorce or a death. This could be a natural death or a death by suicide. And really just a variety of different situations and circumstances that families, youth, communities, right, could identify as being a crisis. When we talk about crises happening, one of the things that we really want to discuss and look at is this idea of activations, right? So activations around crises for families, for youth, and for people is really those situations that can happen, events or circumstances, maybe an environment or a geographical location, these stressors or challenges that could potentially lead to a full-blown crisis cycle, right? These are what, like antecedents. You might hear the word antecedents. What is this causational factor? What is something that happened? Some people might use the word you might hear very frequently, like a trigger. I tend not to use the word trigger for a variety of reasons in the work that I do, but the activations is going to be the same thing. What might be activating a moment where we are going to escalate into a crisis situation? And what we know is that activations can come from a variety of places as well, right? It's like somebody could have a fight or a disagreement. We could have an illness, a change in somebody's typical structure or routine, especially if we're talking about people with complex needs, right? Could be a lack of sleep, feelings of loss of power, and feelings of loss of control. And I really want you to hold that one too as we move through this session together, that feelings of loss of power and feelings of loss of control being something that can escalate, right? Escalate that activation into a crisis for families and for young people. It could be around relationship challenges or stressors in our work life, our school life, our home life, our community life. All of these things can be a part of leading to a crisis for youth and families. When we talk about youth and families and crises, it's really important that we also talk about those signs and symptoms, right? We're laying a little bit of a foundation. What is a crisis for families? What can lead to that crisis for families? And how can we maybe start knowing what are some of those red flags that a crisis might be coming, or we have a concern that a crisis might be coming for our family? I like to think of these as like my spidey senses going off, right? Your spidey senses start tingling. It's like, what are some of those language changes, behavioral changes, maybe some emotional changes in the body language or tones or reactions that people are having, where we start to have concerns that a potential crisis situation might be evolving, right? Where we're escalating into the crisis for a family and a youth. And at the end of the day, when we're talking about family-driven and family-led crisis planning, I want to be really clear that families and caregivers who are raising youth, raising young adults, young people with mental health, behavioral health, or emotion or addiction challenges, right? They live this world 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And you start to become exceptionally attuned to some of those red flags, some of those spidey senses, that spidey sense tingling going off, and some of those signs and symptoms that could lead to a concern of a potential crisis happening. So that's just a little bit of foundation, maybe just setting what is a crisis, what could activate, and what could be some of those signs and symptoms. And you might be thinking, Shauna, why are we going through this? Why are we talking about this? You know, we get it. We're in the field. We do this every day. Or as a family member, I live this every day. You know, when it comes to talking about family-driven and family-led crisis planning, it is absolutely crucial. It is absolutely foundational that we start changing the lens and starting the validation that when it comes to a crisis for families, what leads to it, what those signs and symptoms might be or could be, right? And what activates a crisis for a family is going to be different for each and every one of those families, right? It's going to be individualized to each unique child, each unique young adult, each unique caregiver, parent, each unique family. And this is a key point, because as we move forward today together and we talk about family-driven and family-led crisis planning, when we start with the lens, when we start with that systemic shift, that every single family is different, every single family is going to identify crisis different, every single family is going to look at it different, react to it differently, that is going to start the ability to have that individualized, family-owned, family-driven crisis planning process, okay? So I just wanted to go through that with you together today. So let's talk a little bit about two areas that many of you in this room might deal with, either in your work life, in your home life, in your community life, and that's really around crisis stabilization versus crisis planning. Many times these two can get confused. Many times these two can get misinterpreted. And sometimes in this work, whether you are here in a peer support capacity or mental health capacity or school administration capacity, we can unintentionally think that we are doing crisis planning, when in reality, what we're actually doing is crisis stabilization, right? In reality, we're actually doing crisis stabilization. So let's talk a little bit about the differences, why both are very vital and important to families, and how they are used for different things in different ways at different times for different situations. So let's start off with talking about crisis stabilization. So the first thing I want to talk to you about in crisis stabilization is the understanding that, number one, many times, for many of us, right, families do not come to our supports and services, seek out our assistance and our help, or as parents and caregivers, seek out those support services, assistance, and help from a place of, it might kind of be going a little bit off right now. Things are just starting to get challenging, right? Usually when a family is presenting and wanting supports and services and assistance, they're coming because they're in crisis, right? They are in crisis right now, okay? And when we look at families who are presenting in crisis intervention is a wonderful modality, right? But crisis when it comes to stabilization, these are generally reactive plans, right? That focus on the behavior of one specific person at one specific time. And it's utilized to increase immediate safety in that moment, right? So we're stabilizing immediate crisis in that moment, right? It's going to be reactive, it's going to be an intervention. And typically, when we look at crisis stabilization, it's going to be about increasing immediate safety right now. Okay, it's about identified symptomatic behavior reduction. And it's really important to understand the difference between that and crisis planning as we move forward, because when we're talking about crisis stabilization, this is not an area where we are building long-term skill sets, right? We're building long-term awareness, long-term family self-efficacy, building those protective factors, those resources, those strategies. This is really going to be that time of immediacy, okay? Danger now, harm now, risk now. We need to stabilize that now so we can move forward in supports and services. So one of the caveats to that, or the unintentional consequences to that, is if we believe we're doing crisis planning, but we're really doing crisis stabilization, it can unintentionally send messages to the family as a whole, right? That they're not really needed in that process, or they don't have a role to play, because with crisis stabilization, we're very, very much focused on the immediate safety of the child at risk, or the child in harm, or the young person in risk, or the young adult in harm. So if we shift over to family-driven whole person crisis planning, the contrast is going to be that this should be a process, right? Crisis planning at its core is going to be a supportive mindfulness process that addresses what we just talked about, those unique strengths of a family, the individualized crisis they identify, the individualized signs and symptoms, their unique needs. And it's going to be a proactive disruption of that crisis cycle, right? It's going to be a proactive disruption of that escalation after there's an activation for that young person. So if we look at the diagram above, crisis planning is going to be a proactive process that the whole family should be engaged in, that's going to identify the unique signs, symptoms, activations, and needs of that family, and look at the strengths of that family. And it's going to build on protective factors as a strategy to eliminate or reduce crises in the future. So stabilization, immediacy, crisis planning is a process, a mindfulness process. When we look at crisis and safety planning, there really should be a balance between some of those intervention and prevention components, right? Both are going to be super important. I know in my world with my daughter, we spent, the last 15 years doing multiple different types of crisis plans. And sometimes those intervention strategies were crucial, and sometimes those prevention strategies were crucial. So they should be incorporated into a mindful, useful, authentic, usable crisis plan for a family. Historically, though, when you look at the history or the building blocks of what we identify as system-led crisis plans, right, they tend to be more heavily weighted on the reactionary nature. So I'm a super, super visual person, and I learn through like symbols and signs and pictures. And when I think about that balance, I really think about like a teeter-totter. Y'all remember teeter-totters on the playground? And I think about when it comes to family-driven, family-led crisis planning, we really have to balance that teeter-totter between reactionary and prevention. So when we look at typical system-led crisis plans, they do tend to be a little bit more weighted. They tend to be heavily weighted on that reactionary work, that in the moment intervention work. And, if ABC happens, do ABC right now, right? So what we're trying to do with family-driven crisis planning is rebalance that teeter-totter back to the center where we are utilizing both strategies. So why does this happen? It's a variety of reasons. There's no one answer why we tend to focus on system-led, agency-led, provider-led planning, why we tend to be more reactionary. Sometimes it's really about lack of resources in our area. could be geographical locations. There could be a lack of providers, right? And for some of our regions, some of our areas, maybe some of you in this room, this whole family-centered planning is a totally new concept. It's like this radical new idea. And you might be sitting here going, well, families leading crisis planning, what do you mean? Like, families are the ones in crisis. How can they lead the process? And we're going to talk about why that is actually really crucial to positive outcomes in health, wellness, safety, and well-being for families and youth, right? And for some, families have grown into a culture of dependence on the system. I know I was there. You kind of have this just fix it mentality. I can't do this. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I don't know what to do. Just fix it. Put on your Superman cape and just fix it, right? And we feel very powerless. And for some of you in the room, it's really your agency mandates. You might be sitting here in a capacity where you have contracts, where you have contract deliverables, agency mandates that say, hey, you got to get this crisis planning done in 48 hours after you have an intake with a youth and a family, right? So we have to come up with those really quick intervention crisis planning documents and work. So there's a variety of reasons why we have kind of stayed in that imbalance of the teeter-totter when it comes to family-driven crisis planning. So one of the things about today's topic and this systemic shift, right, this lens shift, this work shift, is that family-driven crisis planning, we're going to start promoting a tipping of the scales back in a way that's going to promote holistic family-centered work, holistic family-centered planning, okay? And when that happens, we should be partnering with families where we have plans that end up being very authentic to them, very meaningful to that family, usable for that family, right? And family owned. And really that's going to be a key, my friends, because here's the dealio. It's like, if I don't own the plan, why do I have buy-in to use the plan, right? If the plan is not meaningful to me and I didn't have a participation in the creation of that plan, how is that going to manifest into being usable for my family, right? When we work together to tip those scales back to having proactive and intervention strategies, we're going to strengthen the bridges between the family and their informal network. We're going to strengthen the bridges between the family and the formal provider network. And at the end of the day, you're going to strengthen the bridges between the family itself as the family identifies themselves, right? We're going to strengthen those relationships and strengthen those bridges, their skill sets, their protective factors, their community networks over time. Okay. Whew. So there's a little bit of the foundation there. And we're going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to look in chat real quick. How many of you, just go ahead, if you got a second, put in the chat yes or no. Have y'all heard of the term family-led, family-driven? Is that words that have been used in your communities? Who's heard of family-led, family? Oh, I'm getting a lot of yeses, couple no's. Ooh, lots. Oh, absolutely. No. Okay, yes, no. Affirmative. I love it. All right. Great. Oh, thanks, Cassie. I saw that. Great. Well, wonderful. So for some of you, this is going to be new information, and that is amazing. And yeah, Anna, yeah, absolutely, and wraparound. Perfect. And Linda, I see, no, great. Colleen, yes. So for some, this might be new, and for some, it might be review. But at the core of family-driven crisis planning, I don't even want to use the word perception because it's not a perception, right? The work of being family-driven, the ideology of being family-driven is the work, right? It is the work. So when we talk about being family-driven, let's look at what does that mean? What does that mean? So we're going to go through a couple of the what's, the whys, what is this thing? And so we'll start with the definition. So family-driven means that families have a primary decision-making role in the care of their own children, as well as in the policies, procedures that govern the care for all children in their community, state, tribe, territory, and nation. What does that mean on the ground level floor? So here's a frequent sentence you might hear when you're in the family-driven kind of realm or world or work. And that is nothing about us without us, right? Nothing about us without us, okay? Wherever decisions are being made about families, families have a right to be there and participate in those decisions. For me as a parent of a child with a mental health challenge, right? And primarily my daughter lives with chronic suicidality. And for those of you in the room who know, that's quite different than acute suicidality. And so we've done a lot of this crisis and safety planning and crisis work to be included, to be an active participant, to have meaningful participation in the decisions, the planning, the concerns, the strengths, the challenges of my child was crucial to us moving forward on a journey of recovery, health, wellness, and well-being, right? And so when we talk about being family-driven, it is really about wherever decisions are made about families, families have a right to be there, right? Because it's about them. At the end of the day, it's about them, right? Whatever statutes are being made or laws are being made or policies are being made or intake forms are being used or meetings are being held or files are being created. Families have a right to that information and to be a partner with you, a teammate with you in that journey to wellness, recovery, health, and well-being. Okay? So why should families be a part of this process? Well, number one, families know what works for them. Many of us in this field, we kind of joke, it's like, I do this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I know what's working. I know what's not working, and I could fill a book up with things that we've tried over 15 years. And, I think about all the different things where we had strategies and supports and ideas and like, yeah, I'm really excited. We're going to try this new thing. And we tried this new thing and, it kind of blew up and it didn't work at all. So we got to readjust, go back and do it again and find out something else that works. For those of us who are providers in the room, and I'm really here wearing two hats, the truth bomb is families do live this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? I don't get to walk away from my daughter at 5 p.m. I don't get to walk away from my daughter when the 50-minute, 60-minute session is over. I don't get to walk away from my daughter on the weekends because it's the weekend, right? I'm the one who has to spend days sleeping on the floor in the psych rooms of the Salem Memorial Hospital because we are in a massive safety stability crisis moment, right? I'm that one. And because I am that one, I have inside knowledge. I have inside experiences. I have inside ideas that a provider won't have because they don't have to be there in those moments, right? So families, they have that tapped in knowledge and that gives them credibility, right? That gives them credibility. We face these challenges all day, every day, right? And so we also know what our limitations are. Families know, if they have limitations on their resources. Do I have limitations on my income for things that we might want to try? Do I have limitations on my environment? Where do I live? Maybe I'm in a rural area. Maybe I'm in a frontier area. Maybe I don't have access to everything that maybe another family does, right? We can keep track of services and change. I'm in my home right now, y'all hanging out in my office, AKA my house. And I have a spare room right down the hallway where I have file cabinets full of plans and documentations and requests and evaluations from multiple providers in multiple areas. We have to keep track of those services and change because if you're a parent with a child with complex needs and you're navigating multiple systems, you're going to have multiple systems that have multiple different ideas and multiple different plans, and you've got to navigate all of that, right? You've got to navigate all that. And really the key sentence here for everybody in the room, whether you're here with a provider hat or you're here with a parent hat, is that why family driven matters is because the family and the youth's comfort and the family and the young person's or the young adult's buy-in is absolutely vitally necessary for success, right? If your family and your young person or your family and your young adult do not have comfort in what they're doing with us as a strategy or support, they're not going to continue to walk that path. If they do not have a buy-in to what we are doing in crisis planning, we're not going to walk a journey of success, right? And so when we have families partnering with us, teaming with us in a family-driven way, then we have more comfort and buy-in into the process. So what would that look like? What would that look like if we had a family-driven, family-led system? Family-driven, family-led system means that people like me, parents like me, don't feel judged or blamed because of our child's behavior. So right now I'm going to speak to the caregivers in the room who raise children with complex needs. And, feel free to put in the chat. You don't have to, but it is not infrequent that we feel blamed and shamed for the challenges our children have, that we feel blamed and shamed that they're not better, that we feel blamed and shamed when they leave residential, things aren't different, right? When they get out of detention, things aren't different. When they finish their therapy sessions, things aren't different, right? Or maybe they're not progressing as fast as people want to, or the plans aren't working as fast as people want to. Many times families feel very judged that our children aren't well, right? And that can be really hard on families. And when we're family driven, we really start to change that lens, right? We really start to change that lens of, it's not your fault, right? It is what it is. And we're going to partner, we're going to team up together on this, right? So family driven also means that families and youth can ask for services and supports they need and maintain their dignity and respect, right? Asking for help should not be a shameful act, right? I think of Brene Brown. I watched a video clip of hers the other day where she talked about judgment and she talked about asking for help and how many times we project judgment for those who ask for support services and assistance for complex needs, right? And when we are family driven, the parents, the caregivers, the young people still maintain their dignity and respect even in navigating those requests. When we look at family driven, families are valued and validated, right? That's a big, big piece. We are validated in the experience we've had. We are validated in the strengths we have. Because I'm going to tell you another truth bomb. Even your most challenging families, I don't use the word clients, but if you use the word, even your most challenging clients, even your most challenging youth, everybody has strengths, right? And we should validate they have strengths. For some of our young people, for some of our caregivers, for some of our families, just the fact they're still alive today is a strength, okay? And we must validate they have strengths, use those strengths, validate their needs, and increase that dignity and that respect and hold them as the experts of their family, of their journey. Families can express challenges, ideas, or plans without feeling alienation or retribution, right? I can tell you right now in my journey, and sometimes even today, but I'm a little bit more articulate, a little bit more of an advocate. I'm sure you can tell. There were times where I had ideas, or I had strategies, or I had things I wanted to ask or include, but I was so scared of the reaction of those on the outside of that circle, right? I was scared. Well, why is she thinking that? Well, that's horrible. Or why would she even consider that strategy or that support? And so when we're being family driven, we're really opening up those lines of communication. We're opening up that curiosity. We're opening up that teamwork, right? That partnering to where we all can share those ideas, strategies, supports, or challenges without feeling like we're going to be alienated because of that. Okay, so that's really the family-driven component. And if you leave here today and the only thing you remember is nothing about us without us, then I'm going to feel pretty good, right? Wherever decisions are made about families, families have a right to active participation there, and they have a right to meaningful partnerships with you there, okay? All right, I'm going to pause here for 1 second. I want to take a look at the chat, see if I missed anything, and then we're going to talk about crisis planning components. Let's see here. Yes. Oh, I see. Thank you all for adding in the yes, 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 yes. You and what a great extra comments. Yeah, and we also have marginalized and oppressed communities that have even more fear, right? And probably experience more invalidation or feel less respect and dignity, right? Especially if you come from a minority community or a historically oppressed or discriminated community. So really, really good addition. Okay, so let's recap and move forward. So when we're talking about family-driven crisis planning, we have to be mindful and walk in with the lens, that foundational lens, that each family is individualized. They are all unique, and what a crisis is for them, what activates a crisis for them, and what those signs and symptoms that could be rising concerns that a crisis might be coming is going to be unique to each parent, caregiver, forever person, child, young adult, right? We should be looking at each and every family who is caring for a young person with complex needs has a right to family-driven care, right? Active participation, meaningful participation, and being able to incorporate their ideas, their struggles, their challenges, their strengths into a planning process with us. In a way that feels dignified and respected. And we also really want to be sure that we're looking at, am I doing crisis intervention right now, or am I doing crisis planning right now, right? Because it's going to be two different things, and making sure that we're not mixing the two up, right? Because crisis planning, and we're going to talk about why it's so important, crisis planning has to be a process, right? It's a process, a mindfulness process. It takes time, and it takes conversations, organic conversations, and learning about the family and teaming up with the family to move forward. So one of the things we're going to look at when it comes to addressing that is we're going to get a little nerdy, just a little nerdy for just a little bit, right? So let's take a look at a little bit of neurobiology of kind of why this matters. Why is it a mindfulness process? Why is intervention different than crisis planning? And how can families fully participate? And when we look at different components of crisis planning, the brain matters. The brain is going to matter, right? And so let's take a look at, we're just going to focus today on the cortex. So you see there's a little brain here, and just transparency, y'all are hanging out with a complete data research nerd. So this is my favorite part of any of these trainings. And so I get very excited about this area. I love the neurobiology. I love trauma studies. I love research. I spent way too many years in college. So if I get a little animated, that's why. But today we're just going to talk about the cortex and why it's going to matter in crisis intervention. You will see in this diagram or this picture where we kind of have the amygdala, the hippocampus, the temporal lobe. In other classes that I put on, if anybody wants to check those out, we dive a little bit deeper into all the components of the brain. But for right now, I just want you to know that those areas we lovingly call the low brain, okay? Your cortex, frontal cortex, cortex right, we lovingly call that the high brain. And one of the cool things about the cortex is this is where you've got all your like awesome functioning. It's going to be the center of where we learn, where we think things out. It's the center of where we do our problem solving, our creativity. It's how we access impulse control. The cortex is where you're going to understand the concept of time, right? Where you understand the concept of geographical location. It's where you understand language and you access judgment. And it is also the part of the brain where you connect memory with context, right? So not just memory, but memory where the puzzle pieces get put together. Like, what does this mean? Why? How does it connect to other things? Memory with context, okay? So the cortex, it's amazing. However, one of the things from an evolutionary, perspective, from a neurobiological perspective, is when somebody, anybody, right, all of us, when we feel we are in moments of real or perceived danger, real or perceived trauma, real or perceived toxic stress, one of the things that happens to all of us is that we go into what's called a fight, flight, freeze, right, moment. I'm sure probably almost everybody in the room today has heard the fight, flight, talk, or have done a trauma class talking about fight or flight, freeze. So why does this matter? When families come to you for support services and assistance, many, if not almost all times, they're coming in current crises, right? And if you're coming in current crises, then you are in real and perceived trauma, real and perceived toxic stress, real and perceived crises, right? And when your brain identifies that it believes that it's in danger, a really interesting thing happens. There is a secretion of a chemical called catecholamiine, okay? Catecholamiine. And catecholamiine, it's really just kind of a fancy way to say stress hormones, stress chemicals. But the thing I want you to understand, which is really vital to this conversation, is the catecholamiine, it really is this chemical that causes a muted conversation between that high brain and that low brain. Now, why would that happen? Because in the moments of real or perceived danger, I need to work off survival. I need to survive this moment. I need to live through this moment. I need to keep going from this moment, whatever the danger is that my brain is perceiving. And so that muted conversation kind of cuts off some of that high brain stuff, because in this moment, I don't need to think it out. I don't need that impulse control. I don't need the creativity. I don't need to access some of the learning or problem solving or all these things that might be great later. But right now, when my brain says, "You in danger, girl," I need to survive. Right? So all of these survival components, this fight, flight, freeze components in your low brain is what's going to take over, right? And that chemical kind of middle ground is what creates that muted conversation between those two areas. So when that happens, again, it's not you're completely disconnected from your cortex, but you have a quieter communication with your cortex. So things get impaired, right? They lessen, like impulse control is lessened, perception is lessened, problem solving is lessened, creativity, logic, learning. Is anybody connecting the dots right now of why this would be problematic if you're trying to do comprehensive crisis planning with a family who's in current crises? And I'm going to check the chat. Is that making sense to everyone? Is this kind of coming together here? Yeah, great. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Hope. Linda. Yes, Jacqueline. Awesome. Lisa. Leslie. Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, Nicole, the flipped lid. Yeah, if y'all want to know what Dr. Dan Siegel talks about, the flipped lid, right? So if I'm working with a family, or if I'm myself, a family member who is in current crises, current toxic stress, current trauma, and you sit me down and say, "Hey, we're going to do a comprehensive crisis plan," I am not connected to my best high brain self. And how can I have active participation with you? How can I have meaningful participation with you in my family's crisis plan if I'm not fully at my best? So this is the time where we do intervention, because when we're doing actual crisis plannings, families should be balanced and at their best so that they have all of that awesomeness up here to be wonderful, meaningful partners with you in a complete comprehensive crisis plan, because that's where we're going to do our best work, right? To ask a family or a youth to do crisis planning in times of crisis where they do not have access to their cortex is really not fair. to be honest. I'm just going to be real with you, right? It's just not fair because we're not going to get the best work we can get done. And we might have a false sense of security that we did. Okay. So that was our little nerdy piece there for a second. And why do we do this? Why should we know about the brain? It's really about the proactive crisis planning cycle. And this is just a quick diagram just to kind of, land that plane there. When we're talking about partnering, family-driven, proactive, positive work on crisis planning with youth and families, crisis planning and the building of those supports and strategies need to start right there at that baseline. Fully connected high brain, low brain, not the flipped lid, right? We're going to be reconnected because when we do that, we facilitate an increase in resources, supports, and services to disrupt the crisis at escalation, right? So we create the plans at baseline so that we disrupt the crisis at escalation. Create it at baseline, disrupt it at escalation. All right. Let me check the chat real quick, and then we're going to talk about life domains. Life domains, and this is another area before we get into our best practices. When we get into like those strategies, what can we do? What's A, B, C, D, E, F, G to have comprehensive, partnering, family-driven crisis planning? Let's talk a little bit about what we should be looking at as parents, caregivers, forever people, young people, children, young adults in crisis planning, and as providers in the room for that crisis planning, okay? So let's take a look here real quick at when we're talking about holistic, family-driven, comprehensive crisis planning. We are gonna make that seismic shift from really focused work, right? We're going to open up that lens. We're going to open up the work. We're going to get outside of the realm of identified symptomatic behavior reduction as the sole thing that we do, okay? And we're going to start looking at crisis planning from all angles, all angles. So when we're talking about comprehensive crisis planning, and for those of you in the room in a provider capacity, I strongly encourage, I really advocate, print these off and hang it on a wall because it's a great visual reminder. Did I miss an area? Am I hitting that area? Is there a need there? Is there a challenge there? Is there a strength there? This is a really good visual reminder. Because at the end of the day, when we are looking at crisis planning, we should be looking at all of these areas of a family's life, right? All families, all of us, we have what's called the 12 life domains. Hope some of y'all have heard of these. For those of you who are in the wraparound process, I saw in the chat, you definitely have. But we should be looking at what is the family's emotional and psychological life domain? What's going on in there? What about their social life domain? What about their legal life domains or their medical life domains? Financial life domains? Do they have a home and a place to live, right? That's a life domain we need to take a look at. Safety life domains. When it comes to reactionary crisis planning, okay, there is a big focus on the psychological safety life domains, right? Safety. But when we start to kind of open this up a bit and start viewing the family as a holistic unit, not just one youth in crisis, but the whole family is touched by crises, right? The whole family is touched by mental health. The whole family can be touched by addiction challenges or behavioral health challenges. Then we start digging deeper into, are there other areas here of challenges or strengths that we missed, and what can we look at, and where is there a need? I mean, if there's not a need, don't make one up, right? But if there is a need, we should be talking about it, exploring it. Let me tell you a little bit about me, just as a story to hopefully this will resonate a little bit. So, like I said, I've been doing this for like 15 years with my own family. And, especially during my daughter's preteen and teen years and young adult life, we would have a lot of crisis and safety plans. I got more crisis and safety plans than y'all even want to see. And it was always really focused around very specific life domains, right? And so when we looked at these specific life domains, it's not that that was bad, because we really wanted to focus on the safety, really wanted to focus on, you know, well-being, life. You know, my daughter lives with chronic suicidality, and keeping her alive and well. But in that effort, the people who supported me didn't do anything wrong, but what they did was they missed opportunities. They missed opportunities, right? Because my whole family was affected, and there was more areas of challenges that we could have incorporated into our plan that would have helped us be more successful moving forward in our recovery journey, our wellness journey. So for example, you know, during a lot of the crises, you know, I was a waitress, and I was putting myself through college. And, you know, and I think back on my life domains back then, and I'll tell you right now, nobody asked me about our financial life domains. And, you know, between you and me and the webinar, like, I was always on the precipice of losing my job, always on this crisis moment of losing my job. Because when you're a waitress, there isn't sick time, there isn't vacation time. You don't show up, you need to cover your shift. There's only so many times you don't cover your shift where your employer's going to replace you. Right? So if I have to spend time in crises, or at the hospital, or in residential, or at another appointment with another provider, right? That always put me in jeopardy in our financial life domain. I was always on the precipice of losing my home and place to live in that life domain, right? There's only so many times that crises can happen in an apartment complex, and first responders got to come out, and maybe things get super challenging, until the manager's like, hey, this isn't working out, right? This is too disruptive to the community. And nobody ever asked me about the home and place to live. Nobody ever asked me as a parent caregiver, or other people in the family, about our emotional, psychological life domain. And I'll tell you, that trauma, it ricochets, it ripples. You know, I had anxiety that was emerging. I had depression that was emerging. And to be honest, I had suicidal thoughts that were emerging, right? But nobody looked at that life domain. So it wasn't that anybody did anything wrong, but there was missed opportunities for full family holistic crisis planning. Okay. I hope y'all are kind of seeing how these can be included in your planning process, and how we can start looking at all of these areas, right? Social life domains. Are people feeling isolated? Is that affecting the family? How can we help on a journey of recovery and wellness, right? Are they having cultural challenges? Is there a spiritual challenge happening because of what's going on with crises? You know, there might not be a need, but we should be asking. We should be digging deeper, because these are opportunities for health and wellness, right? And at the end of the day, as a parent, and right now as somebody who works in the family and youth field, my ultimate goal is family health and wellness, right? Family health and wellness, family success. So really check out, if you're not using the life domains right now, I encourage you to, and I encourage you to print them and look at them. Okay. All right. So we're going to dive into the best practices, right? Let's take a look at what can we do? What are some of the best practice strategies that we can utilize in creating family-driven, holistic, partnering youth and family plans around crises? Okay. So number one, it's always going to be number one. Okay. We should start the planning process in safe and calm times for the family. Okay. Teeter-totter balance. We should start these conversations, these mindfulness conversations, digging deeper conversations, partnering when families are not in immediate crisis. If families are in immediate crisis, then we need to do some crisis intervention, but crisis planning should take time. Okay. Crisis planning should be conversations. It should be strategy discussions. It should be problem solving, digging deeper. Crisis planning should never be done in 30 minutes in your office. Just going to lay that out there, right? It should be a process that we do with families, but it starts with families being fully engaged, youth being fully engaged in their high brain, their low brain, where they can have active participation and meaningful participation in the planning process. All right, next piece, families must lead, okay? Families must lead. So what does that mean when we talk about families must lead this crisis planning process, right? Well, when we look at the traditional historical kind of foundation of system-led crisis planning, right, then really what we were doing was the system or the provider was really leading that process, right? They were looking at supports and strategies to use or what could be helpful. And generally that would come from a mindset of what do I think in this moment would be helpful for you? If I put myself in your shoes, I think A, B, and C would be good strategies, good supports, and would de-escalate crises in your family. Now, why that is problematic is because if I'm just putting myself in your shoes and not hearing about your shoes yourself, there's a false sense of security that what is going to be in the plan is going to work. Because I think it will work doesn't mean you think it's going to work as a parent, a caregiver, a young person in the plan itself, right? So I have this false idea that these strategies are going to reduce harm, are going to reduce risk based on my lens as the provider. So when families lead, we start looking at what is your lens, right? What do you think is going to reduce risk? What do you think is going to reduce harm, right? What do you want to try? Because I mean, at the end of the day, when families lead this planning process, right, this mindfulness, conversation, active listening, sharing process with you, they're going to have more buy-in to the finished product, right? They're going to have more buy-in to the crisis plan itself. They are going to have more ownership of the plan when they lead the plan, right? They are going to find the plan more useful for them, okay? And it's going to have more value to them, right? Because if a crisis plan does not have value to a family, if a crisis plan is not going to be used by the family you're creating it with, okay, honestly, we're just wasting our time. If you are creating plans that will not be used, why are you creating it in the first place? Is that for our own comfort? Is that for agency mandates? Is that for checkbox, right? Is that for contract funders? Because at the end of the day, crisis plans should be created to be used to reduce harm, reduce risk, and help people walk roads of recovery and wellness, right? And if it ain't going to be used, why am I making it? Right? Why are we making it? So when families lead, there is more of a potential, there's more ownership, there's more usefulness, it has more value, and it is more authentic, right? It is more authentic for them. And one of the things too is, part of families leading is you might get a lot of different ideas of what crisis even means to the family. Like, you might be surprised. What you think is a crisis to the family might not be what they think is a crisis. So these conversations matter. The next part about best practice is really identifying who wants to be a part of this planning process, who even wants to be engaged in this planning process with you, right? Because it's going to take a little bit of time. And at its foundation, whoever does or does not wish in the family component, whoever does and does not wish to participate in the planning process is a choice. It is a choice, right? It's voluntary. Why does this matter? I mean, how many of you in this space today, work in trauma-informed care or have taken a trauma-informed care training or have trauma-informed agencies, organizations, systems, right, that you work with or partner with, right? One of the things about that is in trauma-informed care. So number one, trauma-informed care is about how we do the work, right? It's about how we do the work. And part about how we do the work is utilizing the 3 C's, right? Choice, control, and connection in a safe space, right? When we utilize trauma-informed practices in our crisis planning, our family-driven crisis planning, we should also be incorporating family choice, family control, and connection in a safe space. So let's go all the way back to our beginning of our time today at 1 o'clock, where we talked about what could be an activation, right? And I said, hey, hold on to these two. What could activate a family? And a few of those things that can activate a family is feeling a loss of power, feeling a loss of choice, feeling a loss of control, right? So we should be actively engaging and giving that back to families. I encourage you to avoid power struggles. It's not helpful. It's not helpful, right? We're not going to get to roads of recovery. We're not going to get to successful crisis plans if we're power struggling with the families we're working with, right? Let them lead, walk with them. Providers in the room, we are here in a supportive role. We're not here in a you do ABC role, right? Because at the end of the day, remember, you get to go home. At the end of the day, you're not there on the weekend. At the end of the day, you don't have to sleep on the floor of the emergency room, right? I do, right? So that power struggle is not going to be helpful. Be mindful of future opportunities, right? Whatever we create right now, somebody might not want to participate right now. They might want to in the future, right? So shift the lens, a strengths-based lens, that there's going to be future opportunities. Some people are going to want to do more than others. And I encourage you to also shift the lens that even the young ones in the family can have a role in this. Okay. If you're working with a family with a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old youth, they can also participate in crisis planning, right? Have them do some engagement. Young people know what feels good. They know what feels bad. They know what's scary. They know what feels happy. Have them do an art piece, have them do a modeling piece, but allow them to be a part of the family as the family moves forward in health, wellness, and recovery. Okay. And change your lens around resistance, right? Resistance just means that maybe there's opportunity in the future, because I don't need to power struggle with anybody. So the next best practice is start letting the family identify, what do they want to work on? What is most important to them right now, right? We can go through where are you poised for action now? What's most important? Where do you want to go? What will you do? That is a great question. What will you do? Right? Because if we're not doing anything, then we're just creating pretty pieces of paper, right? So when we're talking about identifying what is important to the family, start finding out the hierarchy of what do they want to work on first, second, third, and then roll with it. So for example, you as a provider might identify that the school behavior is a big challenge and you want to just focus on making plans around school behavior. But the family identifies that the home behavior is the big challenge right now. And they don't care about the school behavior. Then right now, what the family is telling you is, I'm poised for action with the home behavior. And if we make a plan around this is an area where I will do something. This is an area where I'm ready to do something, right? And if they're not interested in addressing school behavior right now, that doesn't mean that they never will be. But what it does mean is they're not poised for action there. So you can set up as many strategies as you want, but if they're not willing to walk forward in that action, it's not going to work. So find out where the family's ready to go, start there, and then keep moving, keep moving. The more success that we build, the more the plans might evolve and change, right? Crisis is complex. Families are complex. Things change all the time, okay? But start with, where is the family ready to put in the work? Where are they ready to have action? Okay. And history is your friend. Whether you are in this room as a parent and a caregiver or as a provider, right? History is your friend when it's talking about looking for strategies. Really, really have these organic, open, transparent, compassionate conversations with families about, let's talk about where you've been. What's the journey been like? What's worked? What hasn't worked? What has been helpful to you? What's sometimes not been super helpful? Are there people in your life, formal, informal, natural support people who've been super awesome? Are there some people where it hasn't been super awesome? What makes me feel better? What makes me feel worse? Are there any environments that activate? One of the epiphanies I had in my own journey with my daughter was that there are certain environments that escalated crisis for us. There were streets or buildings or complexes in our area here, right, in Marion County, where I didn't know there was a trauma connection to that geographical location, that environment. And it was that antecedent, which led to the activation, which led to the crisis cycle going, right? And then it would just go. So, even asking parents, are there environmental areas where things happen? Sometimes that's really at home, and sometimes it's at school, and sometimes it's at a faith community, or, sometimes it's a recreational area. Don't know, but we have to ask. Find out what services have helped and what services have hurt the family. Okay. What could be things that you've tried before that did help and didn't. And this last one, I'm going to tell you right now. Ooh, I wish somebody in my world asked me this. Okay. And so I encourage y'all to, I really encourage y'all to take this one home with you, is really dive in with families on the question around, what if you always wanted to try, but were too nervous, scared, or afraid to say it out loud? Okay. What if you always wanted to try, but were too nervous to articulate it out loud? Because many times families have lots of ideas, lots of strategies. Some of them are in the box, some of them are out of the box, but we should explore all strategies, right? And sometimes we as parents and caregivers, because of that shame and blame and that judgment we talked about a little bit ago, are really scared to incorporate some of those great ideas we have, because we don't want you to think we're weird or have odd ideas, or it's not going to work, or it's going to fail, right? So what if you really wanted to try, but never said? Explore that with families. That is really a great thing you could do for a parent, a caregiver, a forever person. All right, so the next part is really what's going to be the goal for your strategy. Once you've identified who wants to work on the plan, the families are leading the plan, what are going to be some of the hierarchies, what are we going to work on first, right? Who wants to work on it, who can do what? Then let's find out what's going to be the goal for that particular strategy. And that goal is going to lead the action. So start asking families, sometimes the goal is just to stay out of the hospital, or sometimes the goal is to get to graduation, or sometimes the goal is to eliminate non-suicidal self-injury behavior, or sometimes the goal is to stay out of like maybe a long-term residential or locked facility or children's state hospital level care. But find out what is the goal, right? What's going to be the goal, and that will start guiding your path. And the last thing is, based on those goals, who can do what? Who wants to do what? Who can do what? But when we're looking at the family from that holistic perspective we talked about just a little bit ago, everybody should have an action step to the best of their desire and ability to want to do so. Anybody who wants to participate should have an action step. Even your young ones can have an action step. Your partners can have an action step. My neighbors had an action step. My mom had an action step. Grandma had an action step, so everybody can do something who wants to participate. Find out who wants to, what do they want to do? And really important best practice, what's going to be realistic for that family? Okay. What's going to be realistic for that family? Families are going to know, hey, this isn't realistic to our culture. This isn't realistic to our income. This isn't realistic to the resources we have in our area, because I have to drive an hour each way to supports and services, right? This isn't going to be realistic because I don't have internet or Wi-Fi or electronics or, those type of communication components. So you got to find out what's realistic for the family, because if you have something that's unrealistic and they try to utilize it, families will feel like they failed, right? And what we do know is that families don't fail, plans fail. Families don't fail, plans fail. If it's not working, we just need a new plan. Okay. Make another plan, strengths-based, move forward, persistence. Okay. All right. And the very last piece we're going to talk, nope, that went the other way. The last piece we're going to talk about is culture. Okay. Culture. This is vitally important. So when it comes to culture for families, the very first thing I want to just lay the foundation on is culture is not race and ethnicity, right? That's not it. Culture is everything about the family you're working with. What is their norms? What is their traditions? What is their structure? What is their boundaries, right? What's okay, what's not okay? What are their celebrations? What are their spiritual practices or not, like, or no spiritual practices, right? Everything that makes up that family is going to matter. And the only way you're going to be able to understand a family's culture is by having conversations and spending time with that family. Because why does this matter so much? I'm just going to lay a huge truth bomb on you. If you design a crisis plan that has strategies and supports that are anti to a family's culture, it will fail. Okay? Just going to say that again. If you design a crisis plan that is anti, in opposition to your family's culture, it will fail. Okay, so culture is vitally important when we talk about supporting a family in comprehensive crisis planning, family-driven crisis planning, because it must align with their cultural traditions, norms, beliefs, structure, celebrations, right? Like what's okay, what's not okay. So when we look at culture, a few things are going to be really important, right? We're going to look at what are their strengths, what are their barriers, what language and experiences are going to be on stage in the event of a crisis, right? How can we use culture to design an individualized plan, right? Culture is going to determine how they react and who's going to be involved in a crisis situation. Is this going to be a private matter? Is this going to be a public matter? What resources they feel comfortable or okay with utilizing? All of that is going to matter when it comes to crisis planning. You know, understanding cultural components of the family, such as, is this a patriarchy, right? Is this a matriarchal family? Who's going to make the decisions? Who's around the child more? Are there going to be spiritual considerations that you need to take into account when you're looking at strategies and supports and services? What is the family's communication style? What behaviors are acceptable where other families might say it's not acceptable, right? Like, you know, people think it's super weird. Like when I was growing up, like we kind of could cuss. I mean, not a lot, but like if you cussed in anger, that was bad. But I don't remember ever, you know, getting in trouble for cussing, you know, growing up. But there was rules around when you could and what you could say and what feeling you had around using swear words. So sometimes behaviors are acceptable in one family that might not be acceptable in another family, might be totally normal for them, right? And again, if you have a plan that goes against a family's culture and daily norms, it's a plan that's going to sit on the shelf. It's a plan that's going to sit in the file cabinet. And if we're not using the plan, we're not reducing risk. We're not reducing harm. Okay. All right. Some cultural considerations is really around what type of services and supports a family wants. So definitely when you get these slides, you're welcome to, utilize this too. Some families are going to have a preference for all formal services, right? Formal basically meaning people who are paid to be there. When we get in crises, we go straight to people who are paid to help us. Some families really have a mix of kind of that formal and informal service network. Some families are really about self-management, right? When crisis happens, it's our culture that family deals with it, right? We don't take this to the outside circle. We don't take this to the outside world. And for some other families, it's going to be kind of a mix of that informal network and that self-management. Like maybe it's families help families, but we can let some of our outer circle in, right? Some of those people, like maybe a youth pastor or maybe the soccer coach, or, maybe some of those not outer circle, but a little bit closer to your inner family circle people. Find out which preference your family utilizes or wants to utilize and run with that. Okay, you can also look at different coping skills, that might be helpful in de-escalation strategies, mindfulness, do they like distraction, self-soothing, opposite action, and y'all can get these in the slides and take a look at them more in depth. Okay, let me check the chat here real quick, and then we're going to talk about some barriers. And then we're going to end with a few additional support strategies, some skills, knowledge, and ability building moving forward. Let's see. Oh, good. Some people have taken trauma-informed care. That's so fabulous. Yeah, absolutely. See some people who are in the wraparound process, know about the life domains. Right on. This is so cool. Taking trauma courses, very helpful. Absolutely. Right? Because trauma-informed care is really about how we do the work. And all of this, I find the more I'm in youth and family work and the more I walk this journey in my career, that so many of these dots connect. So many of these puzzle pieces come together, right? All right. So let's get to some roadblocks, some barriers that can happen when we are talking about family-driven, comprehensive, family-led crisis planning. And we'll go through these briefly and we'll get to question and answer time. So the very first barrier I see when I do technical assistance, excuse me, across the state of Oregon in family and youth work is when crisis plans continue to be something that you are checking a box off for the work you do in the agency you work for, right? If it is just something, it's like, oh, no, I just have to get this done in 48 hours. I just have to get this done in 72 hours. It's part of our checkbox to say that I did that. That's a barrier to actual reduction of risk and harm for families that we support, right? If it's just something you're doing for work, it's not really for the family, right? Again, confusing crisis stabilization, excuse me, with crisis planning. Remember they're different and why crisis planning needs to be done at a balanced, safe time, okay? When we only address one life domain, we are missing opportunities. When we are only relying on formal supports, we are missing opportunities. Some families like mine, we don't rely on formal supports 100% of the time. And I, have a ton of crisis plans sitting in a file cabinet, and I will tell you over and over and over and over and over again. For example, always at the top was like, call 911, call 911, call 911. And we have to have that cultural mindset, that cultural humility that for some communities, for very, very good reasons, will not feel comfortable calling first responders or calling 911 as their go-to for crisis planning, right? We need to have that cultural humility and that cultural responsiveness, because for me, every time a provider put call 911 on a crisis plan, that crisis plan became useless to me because I ain't gonna do it. Like that was a last option for me, not the first option for me, but it was always like at the top of the crisis plans, right? So find out what other supports families might want to utilize if that's not their go-to, right? Make sure that we are using culture in the planning process. When we only create one plan, we're missing opportunities, because let's be real, right? Let's just be real. You will create multiple plans. Plan A is probably not going to work. You're going to work on plan B, plan C, and that's okay. That's okay, right? It just means we're moving forward. We're learning, we're growing, we're getting resilient. We're building protective factors. That's all right. When you don't check in with the family on how the plan is working, that's a barrier to comprehensive crisis plans. And here's another one too. When I used to travel, well, because we're in COVID now, but when I used to travel around Oregon, I saw this a lot, and it is a huge barrier. It's getting stuck in this mindset as providers that there is only one document you can use. No. Get creative, right? This is family-led crisis planning. For some of your families, long 5, 6, 7-page crisis planning documents are going to be awesome. Other families, they have like little just wallet-sized laminated cards they keep with them. For some other families, it's a one-pager. I actually designed a color-coded one-pager that families can use and put on their fridge. And each different section of the crisis plan had a different color-coded area and artwork to it, right? Find out what works for the family. Okay. The last thing you want to do is create a plan based on your perception of what kind of document it has to be on, and it's not used, or it's thrown away, or it sits in a spare room in a file cabinet, right? Because that doesn't reduce risk. It doesn't reduce harm. So last little part, and we are going to wrap everything up. Just remember some tips and tools: review, recap, create the plans before the crisis happens, right? Create plans when families are at a calm and safe time. We must create plans that are going to be used. If they're not going to be used, then the plans are created for our comfort and for our check boxes, for our work. We need families to have plans that are going to be used. Use the family's lived experience. Use their past history as a guide to future planning. Always, always, always use the family's culture in the planning process. Make sure that we are looking at all life domains and include life domains that the family has identified as a challenge, right? Or they might have a need in. Make sure that we are incorporating any family members as the family identifies the family, right? Because families decide who's family. If they want to be a part of it, make sure that we're including them. Hey, and you know what? Here's a radical idea. How many of you have ever included a pet in crisis planning? I'm going to look at my chat. How many of you have ever put pets in your crisis plan? Oh, right on. Okay, I'm seeing some yeses. Yes, yes, yes. Fabulous, right? For many, many, many of our families, pets are part of their family, right? It's their babies, it's their things. Yes. Oh, Annie, I see that. Yeah, dogs are wonderful, right? And here's a cool thing. When we add pets into it, we're again looking at that holistic piece. When I was spending days in the emergency room waiting for an adolescent psych bed, there was nothing in my plan about who's going to turn off my coffee pot, who's going to feed my cats because I'm going to be gone for days, right? Who's going to take the other kids to school, or who's going to do, right? Make sure we're looking at the whole family and making plans for that. And for many people, you include their pets in their crisis plan. That's a very culturally humble thing to do, right? It's a very validating, respectful thing to do, okay? Again, make sure the family's leading the process. It is totally cool if you have to make plan A, B, C, D, E. We're moving forward and it is growth. Include prevention and intervention strategies. Make sure the plan is visible. And always use family voice and choice, okay? Here's the thing. If you're in the room as a provider, my friends, someday you will leave. Someday you will leave. You're going to close that case. You're going to transition out of wraparound. That youth is going to graduate. That young person is going to leave the residential facility. Someday you will not be with them. So let's start creating crisis plans with the family, for the family, by the family, because there's going to be a time in their life when it's only the family. Okay. And I want them to be strong and capable and ready and resilient and have the supports and planning and strategies that they need to reduce that risk and reduce that harm. Okay. Because at the end of the day, they do this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. All right. I'm going to go through this super quickly and then we'll open it up. We'll check the chat. Just some additional opportunities in case y'all want some areas to promote for families and skills, knowledge, and ability growth, right? Check out collaborative problem solving. Collaborative problem solving is an evidence-based model. It's been around for a long time now. I actually remember being at a local hospital in the psychiatric unit, and one of the therapists there was like, hey, we've got this brand new program called collaborative problem solving. We want to invite you to join. And it's just been really cool to see like where it's evolved now and where it is now, because this was a long time ago, maybe like 13 years ago. So this is another area where we really start looking at behaviors and skill sets, right? Why something is happening, how we can work together in partnerships, because it's really about skill, not will, right? People don't want to be in crisis. People don't want to be miserable. Maybe we're missing a skill, a tool in the toolbox, and how can we help people gain tools in the toolbox? So this would be one area. The next one is going to be the LEAP method. Again, another partnering skill set where we are working together in mutuality to address challenges and needs, where we use the listen, empathize, agree, and partner together. And the very last one is going to be around mental health first aid. There's a youth mental health first aid, adult mental health first aid, elder, there's a veterans. I mean, there's a bunch of different subtopics of the mental health first aid, but this is another one where you can just gain additional skills, knowledge, and abilities in how can I intervene, right, when a potential mental health crisis is emerging or getting worse. right? Emerging or getting worse. So it's some of those tips, tricks, skills, knowledge. Now it's available virtually. It also is available in person, so you can find out what works for you. Whew, we did it. All right, it's only 2:30, so we do have a great amount of time left. But just in case anybody has to leave a little bit early, I would be remiss if I did not take a few moments before we dive into any Q&A, or maybe we just end and go about our afternoon. But thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for caring about this topic. Thank you for caring about your family, the families you support, the families in your community, the young people in your community, about mental health, about crises. My heart is so happy. We have, a lot of people joined us today, and this is a community that cares, and I can feel it. And I'm just so excited for y'all to move forward, learn more, keep exploring family-led crisis planning, find other educational opportunities, look at different ideas, different strategies. But I'm so thrilled that you joined me today. This is my heart, and I do think it matters. And I really hope you take some of the nuggets today and move forward and share it with the families you support and serve. So bless you. Thank you. May you all go forth, do good works, love on people, and hopefully I'll see you at another class. So, all right.
Thank you so much, Shauna. I know we've got time for some Q&A, and I see at least one question in the Q&A. So folks, if you want to stick around and put more questions in, we definitely have time for that. The question I'm seeing now in our Q&A is, what happens when families are just done with their child crisis, with what's happening, and they don't want to take the lead?
Absolutely. Wonderful question, because that's going to happen. So let me move some of this stuff real quick so I can. So, this really goes back to the slide on roll with resistance, right? Roll with resistance. You're going to work with families where you're going to have a few people that might be resistant, or one person that might be resistant. And then you're going to have families where the whole group is resistant. And they're like, nope, been there, done that, doesn't work, just fix it, right? Just fix it. And honestly, my best answer, just from the lived experience of working with families and even being that family before, is this is really an opportunity to dig a little deeper and get really curious. Wow, I hear you. So validation, number one, I hear you. I really validate that this doesn't seem like a helpful process to you right now. And I would love to learn more about why. Tell me a little bit about where you've been. Tell me a little bit about when somebody's made a crisis plan and you didn't feel heard, or you didn't feel validated, or you didn't feel like the strategies were culturally appropriate for your family, or they're going to help your family. Learn, 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 learn. Okay. One of the best things you can do with families who we identify them, and I've identified myself with what we call psychiatric survivors. It's where you, in your journey at one point in time, have felt traumatized or hurt by the people you sought support and services from. And that's not everybody, but there's some families out there like that. One of the best things you can do is listen to them, and then listen to them some more, and then listen again, and build some trusting relationships. If a family has been hurt, or if a family finds something that's not going to be helpful, there's a reason there. There's something under the water, right? I always think of like ducks. I told y'all I'm like a visual. You picture a duck on a lake. Sorry, my phone is going off. Got to turn that off. So you picture like a duck on a lake, and it looks really calm, and it's kind of just hanging out on the lake. But under the water, there's stuff happening. There's stuff going on. When it comes to families who are resistant to that stuff, there's stuff going on under the water, right? Something's happening. There's history there. There's feelings there. There's trauma there. There's fear there, hesitancy there. So find out what's going on under the water, and that will build relationships with that family. And the more you build trusting relationships with that family, the more you're going to have increased opportunities moving forward. It might take you a couple weeks. It might take you a month. It might take some time, but it's worth it to put in the effort. Yeah. So resistance might happen. It probably will happen with some of the families. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity.
Thank you so much for that thorough answer. We've got another question in the Q&A. How would you include the family in crisis planning when working with adults, especially when they don't want or families are not involved in their recovery?
I'm not sure I understand that one. I'm so sorry. Could you read it?
Yeah. The question is, how would you include the family in crisis planning when working with adults, especially when they, and I'm guessing the question means, especially when the adults don't want the family involved or the family doesn't happen to be involved in their
Okay.
recovery. So,
Okay.
and if the question asker, if I didn't get your question right, please feel free to type in the chat again.
Yeah, totally. So I'm gonna give you an answer from my best lens. I tend to work and have most of my experience in the family and youth settings, right? So we have that holistic family. When we're talking about adults in recovery, mental health recovery, behavioral health recovery, addictions recovery, that's a bit of a whole nother realm, right? Where we are talking about informed consent, choice, control, connection in a safe space, right? Going back to that stuff. So if I'm working with or if I'm picturing working with an adult who might not be living with the family or doesn't want their family members involved, one of the things I would advocate for, opinion by Shauna, is going to be, where is that person poised for action now? If they're not ready now to incorporate their family members or community members, start where they're at on their journey, meet people where they're at, and then create opportunities for growing that moving forward. Okay. So if right now I don't want my mom or dad involved, and I'm a 25-year-old person in addictions recovery, and I don't want mom and dad involved, I got some resentment there, I got some trauma there, I got some hurt there, or I got some fear there, right? Where is that adult ready now? And then I would gently, over time, as you support that person, see if anything changed. Because sometimes here's an interesting thing. When people don't have hope, they cannot see hope for things changing, right? And when we start where people are poised now, and we can build success over time, or that habit of success, that builds hope. And when that hope increases, then they might branch out that hope to opportunities. Well, maybe my mom can come to this meeting this time. I didn't want them 6 months ago, but maybe, okay, yeah, we'll give it a shot, right? You can build that hope and build that relationships. But if that's where they're at, say, okay, I hear you, right? And here's another thing I really want y'all to know. And again, it's a visual. Just be mindful that agreement and validation are two houses that live on the same street, but they're separate houses, right? You can validate somebody's experience without agreeing with what they're saying, right? I can validate that you don't want your family there and you don't think it's helpful. Even if I don't agree, maybe I think in my head it is helpful. Doesn't matter. I can still validate you. I hear you. That's where you were going to go. That's where we're going to go right now. That's what I would do.
Wow, thanks so much. Questions are coming in. So here's another one. Would you recommend getting siblings involved with the plan? And what if the youth wants the siblings involved, but the parents do not?
So answer to siblings being involved in plans, yes. Right? Because so, picture a family of mom or, dad partner, mom partner, whichever way it is, or, if we have the caregivers and then you've got brother and sister, and then you've got the youth in crises. That youth crisis situations affects those siblings, right? They're not ignorant. They're not in a bubble. They're not shielded from what happens within the whole family. And so because it affects them, we should have that personal, person-driven empowerment to do something. Now, what that looks like could be different for different families. So let me give you an example. For some, the siblings' action in a crisis plan is simply when A happens or things escalate, your job in this crisis plan is to go upstairs, put on headphones, and play Minecraft. That's your job in this crisis plan, right? It doesn't have to be like a therapeutic 10-year-old trying to de-escalate a crisis. Maybe their job is to go do a puzzle, or maybe their job is just to text grandma, hey, come pick me up. It's just a rough day. Can we go to the park? Right? Young people can have an action in the family crisis plan, and what that looks like and what the parents are comfortable with incorporating for that sibling is going to be different, but have those conversations. If a parent is resistant to siblings in there, I'm going to make an assumption here, and I validate it's an assumption. It's probably because they're picturing siblings doing a crisis plan with siblings doing de-escalation of crises, right? And so they might just have a different idea of what it looks like or what the siblings can do. And you can be like, nope, when it comes to crisis plans, that's up to you. It's your plan. Maybe they just go outside. Maybe they just swing in the backyard. Maybe they go play Minecraft. You know, maybe they go get help. I don't know. But let them articulate why they might have resistance to that, and then just see where it goes.
Thank you again for that answer. A couple more questions in the Q&A. I'm not sure we're going to be able to address them all. And I think one of the ones that's really jumping out at me, and I know this isn't a space for you to plan someone's exact strategy, and we're trying to speak to the whole audience with our questions, right? But one of the questions in the Q&A that really stands out to me is building hope. How do you build hope when people continue to state that they've done it all, there's no hope? Seems like a real challenge.
Oh, I have no idea why, but like I'm on the edge of crying with this question. So I don't mean to, but this is such an important question. Such an important question. Because that hope piece matters. That hope piece matters. So whoever asked in the space, you are amazing. I know in my journey, I felt so defeated to where I'm just like, you know, maybe we'll try to give the child up, or maybe we got to do foster parenting or proctor parenting or residentials. It's like you feel so defeated. This answer is going to be, it's a little multi-layered, but I'm going to start with this. I'm just going to speak from my lens, from my journey, because maybe that might resonate with other parents. Sometimes hope, I'm going to try not to get emotional. Sometimes hope just comes from validating they're not bad parents. My literal turning point was I had a support person back when my daughter was like 14, and you know, my daughter spent most of her life institutionalized, locked in one facility after another for a lot of safety reasons. And I had a support person, and she didn't try to change anything. She didn't try to fix anything. She didn't try to get me to do anything. All she did was she just sat with me. Sorry, I'm so sorry. You know, this stuff lives in the body. She just sat with me, and she's just like, you're a great mom. You keep showing up. You don't give up. I know it's hard. I have parents who don't come to the counseling. I have parents who don't do visits. And nobody was saying that to me. Everywhere else in my circles was, it's your fault, or you're doing wrong, or you should be home, or you should have better money or less money, or you should have more education or less education. You should whoop your kids. You shouldn't whoop your kids. You know, it's like everything you're doing is wrong as a parent when you're raising a child with complex needs. And the hope building that you can start with, these are the nuggets you can start with, is just start finding the strengths in your parent. Even if they're resistant to moving forward, find the strengths in your parent and say so. Say so. Because for many parents who are raising children who have complex needs and crises, and we love our children with complex needs and crises, is they don't get a lot of validation, love, support, or positivity. And that to me is the seeds of hope. Because as soon as I started having that seeds of hope, I started being able to open my lens to maybe a little bit more hope. It took a long time. But but it was my person planted that seeds of compassion and kindness and saying those really nice things. And that grew into future opportunities. So that was an emotional question for me, but I bless whoever asked it. It's such an important question.
Yeah, and I just want to share, if you haven't seen in the chat, that people are sending you support, good wishes, that they're saying this is very true, very grateful for you for sharing, sending blessings. You're getting a lot of outpouring of response and love. So I would encourage you to look in the chat.
You
I
all
think,
are amazing. Thank
yeah,
you.
thank you, everyone. That was obviously a very difficult question to answer. Thank you, Shauna, for answering it. We're coming up on the end of, I think, of our Q&A time. There's another question I think that we'd like to try to get to today. What if a family is willing to be part of the crisis planning, but is unwilling to recognize the crisis as valid?
Ooh, they want to do the planning, but they don't see it as a crisis. Really honest, open, transparent answer is if the family doesn't see something as a crisis, why am I making a plan about it? You know what I mean? Because if they don't see something as a crisis, are they going to use the plan? Because their lens is, this isn't a crisis. Let me give you an example. So, some of the research and stuff that I've done and different types of planning that I've looked at is, some really great examples around some families have not found their child's drug and alcohol use to be a crisis. And the providers really want to be like, hey, let's make a plan around your child's drug and alcohol use. And the family's like, I'll say yes, I'll do it because you're asking me to do it, but I don't think my kid's drug and alcohol use is a crisis. So at the end of the day, we're making plans that aren't going to be used. So I guess that's really my honest, transparent answer is if they don't see it being a crisis, we're kind of wasting the paper and the time for everybody. Find out what they do identify as a crisis, start there, and maybe later they might change their lens, they might not. But again, it's their journey, and at the end of the day, they've got to make those decisions and walk that journey themselves.
Great, thank you. And I'm seeing some response in the chat that that is why family support partners are so important. With that lived experience, they can reach families in ways that paid professionals can't, is the response in the chat to
So true.
Yeah.
And that partnership, if you guys have family support specialists or youth support specialists in your communities, in your areas, find them, utilize them. We are bridges together. When the formal supports the provider network is with the peer network, right? We can do amazing things together because we all partner in that puzzle, and each of the pieces can come together for a great outcome and journey for that family.
Yeah, and there's some more responses coming in with the chat and the Q&A. Vibing with what you're saying, basically, and the person who'd raised the question about assessing the crisis, and if they don't think it's a crisis, well, how do you proceed? Yeah, she was saying something about blame within the family. You have to figure things out clearly before you start planning.
It's never easy. No one answer. No, it's you do your best practice and do your best. Yeah.
Right. I think we're getting close to the end of our allotted time for Q&A. I'm thinking, do we have time for a question? How are you feeling, Shauna? Or should we wrap it
let's
up?
wrap it up. Yeah,
Okay.
and then we'll kind of go and rebalance. I'm going to go rebalance.
Yes, sure. It's been a long webinar. We've covered a lot of ground. I'm so grateful. All right, so just a reminder that we do have an evaluation survey, and I know we've posted it in the chat at least once, and you'll see it again in the chat, and we really appreciate it if you fill it out. It helps the funding continue for wonderful events like this. It gives us an opportunity to assess our trainings and improve. To get your feedback is just critical in so many ways, so please do take a moment to get that survey filled out. wanted to remind folks that we, the Northwest MHTTC, Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, are available online. We also have a monthly newsletter that you can subscribe to. You can email us at northwest@mhttcnetwork.org, and we're on social media, Twitter and Facebook. So look for us there to stay in the loop with all of our events. Finally, just our sincere thanks for everyone for joining us today, and our very sincere thanks to our presenter. Shauna, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your expertise today. And we hope that everyone will come back again for another event. And don't forget about July 28th, when Oregon Support Family Network will give us our family partner orientation, like we mentioned at the beginning. So thanks you, everybody, one more time, and we look forward to connecting with you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon.